Kerby Anderson. Each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me. It is the Thursday edition of Point of View. In the first hour, we're going to spend some time talking with our in-studio guest, which I think is going to be gripping and very exciting for you. Then next hour, we're going to get back into the issue of apologetics. Paul Copan will be with us, and then we'll, of course, talk about some of the very important issues in the news, and that's, of course, Ukraine, some things happening in Congress, and a number of other things you need to know about. And we won't get into all the issues in the news today, but, of course, we have our Friday weekend edition that is tomorrow, and we will have Kelly Shackelford and Keisha Russells will be with us, and we'll do kind of a round table then. But I think you will really enjoy this conversation, which is based upon the book called The Witness. Matter of fact, at the National Religious Broadcasters Convention, which we were broadcasting from live last week, I kept hearing the name Robert Borelli. Of course, we've been talking about him and having him come into studio with us, which is so grateful that he is able to do that. Raised in the heart of the Brooklyn neighborhood, a small kind of attention-deprived Italian boy, really began to be attracted to some of the lifestyle of those people that drove Cadillacs, had lots of money, and that, of course, was the mafia. And so he was really on his way to mafia stardom with one of the most prominent wise guys there in New York City. Then you get into the issue of addiction. We're going to talk about that as well. And eventually, federal agents caught up with him, but more importantly, Jesus Christ caught up with him as well. And it's just an incredible story. We have information about this book. We have, of course, a way in which you can get it in paperback or in Kindle, but also he's making it available on his website, so that may be the place you'll want to go. But first of all, Robert, it was great to know that you were there at NRB, and it's great to have you in studio with us today.
Well, thank you so much. And it's really an honor and privilege to be allowed to, because I love to speak about Jesus. So when I ever get an opportunity, so I want to say thank you for allowing that opportunity.
Well, I'm looking forward to it. And let me just simply say that before we get into the story itself, one of the things that was probably the most striking is if you look at the first 5 chapters of your book, all of that happened before you were age 15. And there's an application instantaneously, and that is we need to catch kids when they're young, because a lot of the stories, knife fights, all sorts of things right out of, a Nicky Cruz novel or something like that. All these things happened before you were even 15 years of age. And that's just the first 5 chapters of the book. And of course, there are many other chapters there as well. I think there's 43 chapters. But the point is that when you broke it down by age, I realized that from a very young age, there were some things that could have put you in the right direction rather than the wrong direction. Is that fair?
Yeah, I would, of course. Because not everybody turned out, not everybody in my neighborhood who I grew up with turned out the way I did. So there was some guys were very successful in taking the right path.
Well, let's talk about the story. Growing up in Brooklyn, kind of a little bit of an aging neighborhood. I've lived in Connecticut and have been to New York and Brooklyn, know those areas pretty well. You and I are pretty close in age, so I can imagine kind of the lifestyle and the age in which that was taking place. But give us a little bit of the background before you became one of the wise guys, if you will.
Well, growing up in the neighborhood, Brooklyn, it was a pretty tough neighborhood, I try to explain it like I didn't hear the term race or anything like that, but it was basically you stood with your own kind. It was kind of that's how you were taught in your neighborhoods. And the neighborhoods were dissected. You had Italians in one neighborhood, Irish in another, blacks, Hispanic.
Sure.
And that's just what. So if anybody went on somebody else's turf, you had to protect your turf.
That's right.
You understand? So it started at a young age, just gangs and stuff like that. And I think back in the 80s, there was a movie that came out called Warriors.
Warriors.
And it was about my neighborhood, Brooklyn, and how the street gangs used to have their own little territories and used to have gang fights. So I grew up like that. And I was a small, young kid and picked on, but wouldn't allow that to happen. So I did
Pretty
whatever
tough.
it took
Yeah.
to make sure I won my fights. Let's put it that way. But I'll get into details.
Well, and again, at first you carried a knife, and then you realized, probably better to carry a box cutter because I can do damage with it. But then if I get pulled over by the police, I'm not carrying a weapon, if you will. And I thought that was interesting. That's early on in the book, right?
That was. I don't know how my brain used to work, but I knew back in the days if you got caught with a knife and it was a certain amount of inches over, the blade was a certain amount of inches, you could get arrested. But so I decided, okay, I don't want to get caught and get arrested. So I figured if I carry a carpet cutter, that's what it was. I believe that's what it was, or a box cutter, carpet cutter.
Yeah.
And, if they said anything, I could say it's my father's tool. I'm just holding on to it or something like that. So it would just gave me a way out, I guess. So, but.
Well, how did you get to the point of just being a guy that's kind of a tough guy in the neighborhood to tied into, of course, what we call the wise guys, the whole mafia? Because as we go along, the whole issue of the mafia and the face of the mafia began to change. But for you in the 50s and 60s, very different than later on. So talk about that.
That's for sure. These guys protected the neighborhood. They really did. So they made sure everything was on the up and up in the neighborhood. They made ways for people to respect them. They made ways for people to earn money. Back in those days, I remember as a kid even taking like maybe $1.20 from my mom. She would give me and have a number on it, and I would go to one of the grocery stores and give it to the guy, and they did numbers, and there was a way for the guy to make money by taking the number, and there was a way my mom maybe could make a couple of dollars if she hit the number. So that's how I seen it, and I was kind of like the respect that they got from everybody in the neighborhood. Now, there wasn't a lot of violence at that point in time, so it just looked like they took care of the neighborhood and people respected them. My mom and my dad were legitimate people, and they worked hard, and for the first 8 years, there was 4 of us, and then another child came along, so there was 5, and to make ends meet was really hard for them. So I didn't want to have the struggles that they had, so the only other place I looked was to these guys, and they had a social club. They would allow me to come in there and shoot pool, and then every now and then send me on an errand, and I make a couple of, actually it was change at that time, wasn't even dollars, but I would make a couple of, added up a couple of dollars a day doing that there. And I just fell in love with that lifestyle.
And again, people that have watched movies, you go back to the turn of the last century, you got the Gangs of New York, or more recently, Goodfellas and things like that. That might give you an idea of how some of that was. It wasn't necessarily always violent, although early on you talk about some times in which you ended up having to, because you were protecting yourself, having to stab somebody. But that is how it kind of developed. But the mafia began to change, and that's where the drug issue came in. And you scare me as I read through the book of what it was like when you had to deal with somebody that was kind of strung out on drugs, because you never knew what they were going to do, did you?
No, I never did. I don't know how to explain it, but the people that I despised was drug addicts growing up. Mm-hmm. And that was taught even in the lifestyle of the mob. You didn't get involved with the drugs. That was not really true. But at that point in time, for me, I believed it anyway. So I used to go and beat up kids that were on drugs, and there was times when angel dust was coming around where you didn't, if you hit this guy, they didn't feel it, so you had to, do maybe other things.
We'll come back and talk a little bit more about that. We're coming to a break. But first of all, if you find yourself saying, I would literally like to read about this story, which is an incredible story, The Witness, the tale of the life and death of a mafia madman. And we're talking with him today in studio, Robert Borelli. And if you'd like to join us a little bit later, we'd love to get your comments. All that available on our website, pointofview.net. We'll be back right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
In a recent essay, Lathan Watts talks about the value of free expression. He begins with a discussion of religious liberty since he's a lawyer with First Liberty Institute. He quickly explains that freedom of expression involves more than just religious free speech. His organization has seen these situations. A baker can lose her business because of her religious convictions about marriage. A football coach can be fired for kneeling in silent prayer at the end of a football game. A flight attendant can be fired for providing requested employee feedback. He concludes that each time a person of faith is forced into silence, or the untenable choice between piety and prosperity for a thought crime, or merely seeking to live peacefully according to their beliefs, which of late are at odds with cultural orthodoxy, defenders of religious liberty caution against a slippery slope towards tyranny. Why are we seeing such censorship? He believes that sometimes it is due to blissful ignorance or naivete. Other times it is arrogance from people who are supremely confident that their views are right and will never be in the minority. But they need to remember that they could suffer the same fate as those they persecute. So how should we respond when we are confronted by ideas with which we disagree? He argues that the proper response is introspection. The writer of Proverbs reminds us, as iron sharpens iron, so one man sharpens another. A civil discourse can help us understand others and may provide insight we do not have. It can help us refine and improve our positions. This is the price we pay for liberty. We are better people for being willing to engage the world of ideas, and if we want freedom of expression, then we should be willing to grant that same freedom to others. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free copy of Kerby's booklet, A Biblical View on Inflation, go to viewpoints.info/inflation. That's viewpoints.info/inflation.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, talking in studio with us today, Robert Borelli. Let me just mention we have a number of other resources. Those of you watching online, I hold up one of the little booklets and some of the material. This is a postcard here, Robert Borelli Ministries, and one of the sponsors is Roaring Lambs, and Donna Skell, you know, because she's been on the program with us many times before, sits on your board. So if you'd like to know more about him, first of all, we have information about the book, but most importantly, we have a link to his website. So scroll down, you'll see his picture, his whole testimony, which we're going to try to cover as best as we can. And then you can go to the website and find out more about his ministry, robertborelli.com. Don't even have to know how to spell that Italian name, although it's pretty easy to spell. It's all on the website. There's a testimony there, information about the book, and speaking engagements. And you might want to have him come and speak at an event. And so we wanted to give him some exposure. He was getting quite a bit of exposure last week at the National Religious Broadcasters Convention, but since he could come in studio here in Dallas, which is where we're broadcasting from today, we are privileged to have him here. Let's go back to this issue of the drug culture. That changed everything. You grew up in Brooklyn, I grew up in Berkeley, but same thing. You can kind of see how the whole drug culture changed. It used to be that druggies were on the periphery of society, and as you said, you maybe even beat them up. I didn't, but there was certainly a sense in which that was on the periphery, but then it got to be mainstream, and eventually the mafia, even though they said we don't like drugs, we do like the money that comes from drugs, and that changed everything, didn't it?
It did, like in the beginning, I dabbled with drugs, but really, I wanted to be the wise guy. I really wanted to be,
Yes.
so I abstained from a lot of that stuff. Not saying that I never tried it, but I didn't get addicted to it. I let it go. My biggest addiction back in them days was gambling.
I can
because
believe
I
it.
was around gamblers. I was around, everything we did was gambling, whether it was numbers, off-track betting, sports, whatever it was, card games. So I got addicted that way anyway. But I went off the subject. But the drugs came. I don't know how many people, I don't know what kind of audience that you have, but when you seen the movie, the first Goodfellas, not Goodfellas, I'm sorry, mafia movie, Godfather.
Godfather's another one. Yeah.
And they show you when Don Corleone doesn't want to get involved with the drugs.
Right.
And he says three things in that movie that was so powerful for me when I learned it later on, growing up in that lifestyle. He said, number one is if we bring drugs in, we're going to lose our politicians, the ones that they were giving money to, because they're not going to get involved with that kind of. He said, two, we're going to make rats out of people because nobody's going to want to do 20, 30 years because that's what they were giving out back then for drug trafficking. He said, number three, he said, before you know it, it'll be in our own backyards.
Yes. And they were concerned about what that would do to their own kids.
Exactly. And all three of those things, when I grew up, started seeing that there. But the money was so powerful. So I was at one time working a dice game, illegal dice game. I mean, that's kind of one of the jobs that I had. Mm-hmm. And these guys would come in. There's one particular guy came in, and I say he lost about maybe $10,000, $15,000 probably within 30 minutes.
Wow.
Now, I work these games a lot. And I know people get very mad when they lose their money.
Don't you
this
know?
guy didn't have wasn't like really upset. So after he lost his money, he goes to one of the guys and he says, could I send Robert out to my car? So they said, yeah. So he said, I want him just to get a package that I have in the car. So he gives me the keys to a brand new Jaguar.
Wow.
Beautiful car. Very impressed with it. And there's a brown paper bag in the seat. And I take it, I bring it to him. There's just more money. So I was very impressed by it. And I don't remember if he got his money back, he lost it all. I don't remember that part. But when I asked one of the guys, I said, what does he do that he could lose that kind of, because we were talking back in the 70s, that's a lot of money.
There's a lot of money. That's when a dollar was worth a dollar.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I said, well, what does he do that, I mean, he could lose that kind of money and then just brush it off like no big deal. And they said he's one of the biggest drug dealers in Harlem. Mm-hmm. So that brought lights into my head, and I'm saying, okay, now.
Bingo.
I want power. I want them. Money brings you power. That's number one. They bring you a lot of people around you, and then you can control a lot of people when you have a lot of money.
That's right.
We already seen that in life, right? So that's what I did. So I got involved with selling drugs, and then before you know it, the drugs started selling me,
Yes.
and I lost everything.
Well, and again, you really wanted to try to get clean. You tried to start a family, but it just went from bad to worse. So talk about that downward spiral. We talk quite a bit, Robert, about addiction. As a matter of fact, we've said that over the last couple of years, we have tried to expand the 2 E's. We've spent a fair amount of time talking more about the economy. You can understand why that is. And number 2, emotional issues, because we recognize that addiction is just horrific. We've had this pandemic, the lockdown, anxiety, suicidal ideation, and all the rest. So we've been down this road before, but talk about your story, because this road to addiction caused a situation where eventually, even your family didn't want to have anything to do with you. Talk about that.
It came to where I really felt completely hopeless, but believe it or not, I thank God for that today. And I'll try to get into that a little bit later as we go on. But I started selling drugs, and then I was pretty sociable, because when I was hanging out in Manhattan with all the big wise guys, go to the bars after the game, have a few drinks, a few lines of Coke, sniff a little bit of Coke, and hang out and just have a good time. And it was that way for a while. If you've seen the movie Goodfellas, you can see some of that was going on there, too. Matter of fact, those guys happen to be friends of mine from the neighborhood that actually were in that movie.
There you go.
Not the actors, but the actual people.
But
anyway,
yeah. So
I was sociable for a while, and it did go pretty good, and I was making money and coming into good money. The bad thing for me is I had another addiction, which was gambling. So I would be at the racetrack every day, betting sports every day. So whatever money was coming in was going out pretty quick. And then with the coke and the drinking and all that lifestyle. So I didn't see a big problem with it because money kept on coming in. But then it got bad for me. And then I started doing a lot of coke, and I would stay up for a couple of days.
Yes.
Then I couldn't. So the guilt would make me run away even more. So now instead of facing people because they knew I was getting high, and the shame and the guilt, I would stay getting high, and it just escalated. And then I started losing everything. I started losing my reputation that I fought so hard in the neighborhood to get. The respect that people have for me, the respect I had for myself, I was losing. My ego was kind of diminished. So basically, then somebody turned me on to freebasing.
There you go.
Okay. So that was a Hollywood thing, and I said, okay, that's pretty cool. So I freebased a couple of times, and I didn't get addicted to it the first couple of times. But then I did, and then I lost really everything. And then crack cocaine came around, which is the cheapest high. And before you know it, back in 1993, I was strung out on crack cocaine. My girlfriend's my girlfriend was having a baby, my baby, and I was in a rehab trying to clean up my act. And they let me out of the rehab when she was born, and I cried like a little baby, thinking that, okay, this is something that's going to change my life, and it didn't work.
It didn't work. Eventually, you're hiding out in crack houses, trying to escape from, obviously, federal agents. They eventually catch up with you and all the rest. And you think about this because, lots of times it's marijuana, cocaine, crack, but now we're dealing with such things as meth, methamphetamine, and fentanyl, and a variety of others. I mean, the dangers for young people today are even greater. But we're coming to a break, so I thought we will, after the break, actually get you saved, because we haven't done that yet, right? And that's important. But I wanted to set that up because this book really takes you through, in most of the chapters, the downward spiral. And this happens in your 30s and 40s, pretty much, early 40s, and then you start having some other things happen. You also got some great pictures, which I loved as well, because it gave me a good idea of kind of understanding a little bit more of your life and also the importance of that. But let me, if I can, as we go to the break, let me encourage you to go to the website, because you may want to say, I'd like to read a little bit more about this. I'd like to watch a little bit of the testimony. Maybe even as you're listening to this, you'd say, I'd like to maybe take this particular interview, which we'll have, of course, up on our website. It'll also be up on YouTube, and pass it on to some others that maybe think this is a glamorous lifestyle, because we'll learn some lessons vicariously from Robert Borelli, but also an incredible confusion story and a well of a tremendous ministry as well that has developed. So you can find out a little bit more about his book, about his speaking engagements and all the rest, and it's at robertborelli.com. And if you can't remember how that is spelled, or you are driving right now, just simply go to pointofview.net. We have all of that there. And if you'd like to listen to it again or watch it again, we have a red button you can click on. And, of course, we'll come back and talk a little bit more about your ministry and your conversion story, which is an incredible story as well. All part of this book, which we are making available to you if you'd like to get a copy, and he's making it available on his website, so that's probably the best place to go. The Witness, the tale of the life and death of a mafia madman. We'll continue our conversation with Robert Borelli right after this.
How has Point of View shaped your point of view? For the last half-century, Point of View has brought light to the culture thanks to the partnership of listeners and supporters like you. That's right, it's been 50 years. To celebrate our 50-year anniversary, Point of View wants to hear from you. Has Point of View ever inspired you to take action? Do you feel your faith and Christian worldview have been strengthened by the program? If so, share your story with us. Email it to story@pointofview.net or call 800-347-5151. Point of View would be nothing without you. You are Point of View's legacy. Don't let that legacy be forgotten. Share your story today. Tell the next generation how Point of View impacted your life. Your testimony could even be featured on the program. Again, share it to story@pointofview.net or call 800-347-5151. Story at pointofview.net and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, is Kerby Anderson.
Back once again, if you'd like to join the conversation, let's open up the phones. Perhaps you have a comment or a question. I would certainly welcome that. 1-800-351-1212. We are privileged to have in studio with us for the rest of this hour Robert Borelli as we talk about The Witness, a tale of the life and death of a mafia madman. And, of course, we haven't gotten him saved yet. We're going to do that in just a few minutes. But I always encourage you during kind of the bottom of the hour to check out the website, and it is robertborelli.com. From Mafia to Ministry. Now, it has a list of some of the activities that he's been involved with or others in the future. It has an opportunity for you to get a copy of the book. You can get it in paperback or Kindle. And then there's a place for you to maybe have him speak at an event, and it even has a whole thing on speaking engagements. And Robert, I know one of the things you're wanting to do is to have a greater presence, first of all, on YouTube, so I'm hoping you use some of that. I see some of your fellow mafiosos are actually using YouTube to go out and speak on that issue. And it is just, I think, a great opportunity that God has placed in your hands to have ministry. So you're available for speaking, aren't you?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
And
I welcome it.
And so, again, we have that link on the website at pointofview.net. But, again, we've been talking about from mafia to ministry, so let's get into that. Your story, first of all, of sometimes I say when you finally hit bottom, all you can do is look up. But talk about how you came to Christ.
Well, we ended the last conversation about my daughter being born.
Right.
And
hoping that it was going to work. Yeah.
And it didn't work. Well, I'm going to go back there because 7 weeks after she was home, I stood clean, had an argument with her mother, went out, thought I was going to get high one more time and then come back home, and that never happened. So I wasn't allowed to see my daughter because of my addiction and my lifestyle with the mob. The mother thought it was best that I wasn't in my daughter's life. So my daughter was born in 93. 95, I got cleaned up again and then started hanging out with the wise guys again in Miami, Florida, got in trouble there, ran away from the law. Long story short, I got a visit by two angels. It was January 23rd, 1997. And I called my two angels. They didn't have halos and they didn't have any wings. They were two warrant officers. Somebody told them where I was. They were looking for me. The government had a warrant out for me for my arrest for Miami, Florida.
Right.
And the state had a warrant out for me for a drug sale that I did, a felony that I had. And they caught up with me, and I call them my angels today because that's the last time I had a drink and a drug, and that's over 25 years ago.
Congratulations,
so I
first
thank
of all.
God for those two warrant officers. I don't know if they're alive today, but thank you. So now I wind up in Rikers Island.
Yes.
Okay? So now I'm in Rikers Island, which is probably one of the toughest prisons to be in at that point in time. So I do what I normally do, okay? I'm in a big mess, so now I have to get a good attorney to get me out of the mess that I got myself into. But now you got to remember, I was on drugs and homeless at that point in time, so I don't have any money, so I got to call up people who maybe I did favors for back in the days and see if I could raise money. So I'm calling up people. Everybody's giving me the stiff arm, so to speak. My daughter's mother's allowing me to call my daughter up because she feels okay. He can't come and see her. He's not going to be in her life, but at least he could talk to her. Then I need to get commissary monies so I can live as comfortable as possible because I'm in prison and I'm going to stay there for a while.
Yeah.
Those are my things. So everybody's giving me the call. So I call up this one girl and she says, why don't you go read the Bible? And I say, okay, it's just another brush off. Where am I going to find commissary money or an attorney in the Bible? That's what I'm thinking. So, okay, they don't want to be bothered. I call up my daughter maybe a couple of weeks later and she's crying. And I said, Brianna, I said, why are you crying? She said, because you won't come and see me. Now, if there was a way I could have got medicated, because that's what I love to do, is medicate the pain that I was dealing with through a lot of that. The drugs did a good job on me of medicating myself. Yeah. Not feeling the pain, but now I can't get medicated. And it just crushed my heart. It just shattered in pieces, and I cried. And I didn't want the inmates to see me crying, so I slammed down the phone. Now, I was raised Roman Catholic. Now, I'm not thinking against Roman Catholics, but just for this Roman Catholic at that point in time, I knew about God, but I didn't know God. So I ran back to my cell, crying like a baby, and gave God an ultimatum. I said, God, if you're real, either have somebody here kill me or change me because I can't live with this pain that I'm living with anymore.
Wow.
And I believe that was my conversion. I believe God sincerely answered the desperation of my heart that I really didn't want to live this lifestyle anymore. And And of course, he did the latter because I'm here speaking to you. So.
Yes. Well, and you could have died of overdose. You could have been killed, but here you are. So let's talk about the ministry that you have, because I want people to know that this is really an opportunity, as, again, some of the material says, from mafia to ministry. So talk about how that has developed over the years, because that's pretty amazing.
Okay, for those that don't know, because of that time, and I would like to say it was my new fate, but basically just get myself out of the mess I got myself into. The government gave me an offer I couldn't refuse.
Yes.
They didn't know how to speak my language. And they said if I cooperate with them, they'll help me out and recommend that I go into the witness protection program. And so for a couple of years, I couldn't tell anybody anything about me. So I got a new name, a new identity the government gave me. But I think I'd love to share this here because what the government did by giving me a new identity, a new birth certificate, new social security number, there's nothing past 1999. You can look up Robert Borelli. I'll give you you can't find nothing past 1999.
Right.
But the same thing the government did in the natural, Jesus Christ did in my spiritual.
Yeah, that's a great story. Yeah, tell that.
He wiped the slate clean.
Yes.
I have no record with him anymore as far as
Yes.
my sins were wiped clean, and I have a new identity in Christ Jesus. I'm a new person, a new creation in Christ Jesus, and I love the analogy that I could use. What the government did in the natural, God already did in the spiritual, but I thank God that he did it in the spiritual first before the natural came. Because a lot of people go into the witness protection program and come out the same, and live the same lifestyle that they live. So I'm thankful that he started the transformation part before I actually got the new identity as Robert Borelli.
Sometimes when I speak on grace, I use different illustrations, but I may borrow yours because it's a good one. It's kind of witness protection. It wipes away all your sins before 1999.
Amen. Yeah.
And it's a great story. And again, just another part of your testimony. But when you go into communities now, people might say, well, would it be safe to bring Robert Borelli into the church and actually give his testimony? Would it be safe to have you come and speak to a Chamber of Commerce or a Lions Club or something like that? What's available, and what have you been doing as a ministry?
I have been in all those places. Just that I've been thrown out of the witness protection program. That's why I could talk about it today. But I married somebody from New York that I wasn't supposed to do. So they said I violated my protection.
Right.
I broke the trust, and they threw me out of the program. And my wife was the one that said, now you could start telling your real story.
Right.
And it opened up a door of relief and kind of freedom for a long period. For the first 2.5 years, I had to cover up things that didn't make sense. Like, what are you doing in Texas? Well, what's your background? You have any family? All these things that I had to just make up. Anyway, it was just really hard. So she said, now you're free to tell your story. So I started telling my story. So that's kind of like what I do. So I love to share what Christ has done in my life.
I say, yes.
I love to try to bring, because when I was in Rikers Island, I felt completely hopeless.
Don't you
really
know?
did.
Yeah, how could you not?
And I just love the fact that God could take those broken pieces, put them back together in such a way that you have so much more value after the brokenness than before the brokenness, the way he puts it back together. And I just loved what he did in my life. So I go around sharing. I want to bring hope into people's life. I want to let people know that there's hope for a new beginning. Each and every one of us, no matter what circumstance we have, what situation we might be in, it's never, never too late for a new beginning. And Christ, my new beginning started on my knees. And I love to share. You see, I went to Criswell College. I went to Christ for the Nations. I had a hunger for more of God, a real thirst for more of God. I wanted to know more about him than I could possibly know about him. And I could tell you this, and this is honestly, somebody could probably argue me about my theology, but nobody could argue with me about what Christ has done in my life. That's why I love to share my testimony.
And again, I want you to hear this story. We're going to take a break, and we come back, maybe we'll talk about the fact that not only because you're no longer in the witness protection program, but also because some of your fellow wise guys are now actually out speaking. So that also gives you the freedom to address that issue as well. So we'll talk about that in just a minute. And we only have one more segment with Robert Borelli. And if you'd like to ask a question or make a comment, I suspect most of you are just sitting back, listening and encouraged. But if you would like to make a comment or something, because we're going to be moving on to a different topic, in the next hour. You certainly can give us a call, 800-351-1212. If you find yourself saying, okay, I really want to see what he looks like, well, you can, of course, watch on our YouTube stream that is there, but you can also go to the website, which we've made available for you today. Got a great little testimony there where you get a chance to hear from him, and you might even want to have him come and give a testimony. This will get the attention of a lot of young people, and I think might be something that you might want to use in your own ministry. So we'll continue our conversation with him right after these important messages.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes, and Robert Borelli in studio with us again. You might want to get a copy of the book, The Witness, the tale of the life and death of a mafia madman, and more importantly, you might want to go to the website. But I know there are a couple of questions people have, and I might even take a phone call, but one that's probably going through the minds of individuals. Okay, you're in a witness protection program, and then you applied to Christ for the Nations, and apparently that was almost a deal breaker. Talk about that.
Well, yeah. Well, I got thrown out when I got married, but a friend of mine went to Pat Robinson and said, "Hey, this guy's really got a program," because people found out where I was.
Right.
So Pat Robinson said to my friend, "Tell him if he's really serious about ministry to go to Christ for the Nations." So I applied for Christ for the Nations, but I have to tell him that I was in the Witness Protection Program.
Right.
And they said, "Okay, but we need to pray about this before we can let you come in."
Yes.
So after like 3 months of their prayerfully praying, they sent me a notice saying, okay, you could come, but you can't share your testimony. So I had to stay away from that too for a couple of years as I was in Christ for the Nations. But now people ask the same question, like, are you in danger? Are you afraid? And this is what I say. I say fear will paralyze us from doing what God has called us to do.
Right.
How can I tell people that they need to surrender their lives to Christ and trust him with their lives if I'm not really willing to do that myself?
Right.
And I'm not trying to be presumptuous with my faith. Don't get me wrong. I don't go into social clubs and the mobs and say, okay, we need to get saved. I don't do that. I'm pretty smart about what I'm doing. But the key thing is I can't lose anymore. Paul said it great. He said, I know to be in the presence of the Lord be a greater honor, and I'm paraphrasing it, to be with him right now, but for now, he's keeping me down here for the sake. So I believe the same thing. If they kill me, I go to heaven to be with the Lord. If they don't kill me and I stay down here, I could do what God's called me to do. So I can't lose. I'm in a win-win situation.
Yeah. Absent from the body, present with the Lord. And it's such a great deal. Let's talk about your ministry, because I want, first of all, individuals to think about whether or not they would want to have you come and speak, but maybe they'd like to support a ministry that actually is reaching out to individuals with an incredible story. And, of course, you have been on a number of broadcasts even this last week. You've done television, radio. You mentioned 700, you mentioned Pat Robertson, been on CBN 700 Club. You're on with us today. There are some opportunities for you to expand that ministry and really make a difference. And I think this might be really attractive to the younger generation when they hear your story, just as they sometimes are actually more likely to go and hear from a athlete that's been very successful. Sometimes they're also likely to come and listen to someone who was kind of at the culmination, even the pinnacle of the mafia world, and yet had nothing to show for it, because ultimately there are greater things that have come since you become a Christian since then. So how can people support you, and what can they do to actually help you begin that ministry and to even continue it as it's going along?
Well, they can go on the website and they can make a donation if they want to. The book itself too. If they make any donation, just make a donation for whatever amount it is that God places in your heart, and I will sign the book and mail it to you personally. I do that. If they just want to make a donation to help us to accomplish the things we're trying to accomplish, like get something on YouTube. I just believe that God is saying to me right now, we need to expand your territory. I mean, especially everything that's going on. My message is a message of hope, man. It's never too late for a new beginning. I got my new beginning on my knees. I want to encourage other people to get their new beginning, but I know it can happen many ways. But when it happens on your knees and God really starts working in your life, there's nothing greater than that. So whatever they can do to help me, that would be great. Speaking engagements is a way of me bringing books and getting books sold. We don't sell books. We only do them for donations. We're not in distribution, sales business, but for whatever donation that supports our ministry. So, but I love to share what Christ has done in my life, because I believe with all my heart, if God can save me, he could save anybody, and nobody, and I actually mean nobody, is beyond the grasp of God's grace and mercy.
Well, and again, we so often, when we talk to individuals, if you've ever done church deposition and visitation and things like that, you always run into individuals that will say things like, well, I don't know if God will accept me, because if you know what I've done in my background, and that's why I think you can have such a powerful impact. You could say, if you know what I've done in the mafia, if you know what I've done in the drug culture, you have no idea. Yours is nothing compared to that. And so, again, I think it is an idea that needs to be communicated more in our churches, that there is a new beginning, because there's a fair amount of people that have shame. They have a sense of not really knowing whether or not there is anything truthful to the gospel. And your testimony really provides a number of things. First of all, no matter what you've done in the past, there is a new beginning, and God can use you. Number two, you don't necessarily have to be totally educated. You don't have to go to seminary and those kinds of things to do that. And more importantly, there is a chance for you to really make a positive difference in the world. And so I just think your testimony is going to be one that a lot of people can use. So when they go to the website, is there a phone number they can use or an email? What's the best way to contact you?
I'm not sure of the phone number that's on there, but yes, there's an email address. They could just put something in there. They don't even have to make a donation. If they don't want to make a donation, if they can't do that right now, they could still put a note in there, call me or whatever it is, and just get in touch with me. Or you could go to my email address, which is Robert@robertborelli.com.
Yes, and we have that link there as well, rob@robertborelli.com. Just put your name and email there, and you'll have access to that. And so maybe that is something that you can put together. But I'm really excited for you, and I was thrilled to see that you were at the National Religious Broadcasters Convention in Nashville. They were working you pretty hard there last week, weren't they?
It's exciting to be around.
It is pretty exhausting, and I'm still trying to recover a little bit from last week. And I know that you were being interviewed. The only thing more complicated is when I was being interviewed on radio and television and then doing interviews and then doing evening events, including getting the award for 50 years of broadcasting. You could just sort of poured me into the seat when we finally went back on Saturday and then had to teach in my own Sunday school class on Sunday. So, Robert, I appreciate you coming in. I was hoping that we might catch you at NRB, and then I found out you could actually come in studio here. I know it's a bit of a drive here, and I know you got a lot of things to do, but it means just the world that you would come in and spend an hour with us today here on Point of View.
Well, it means so much to me for you to have me on your show. Thank you so much for allowing me to share my story.
One last time, it is called The Witness, which is the tale of the life and death of a mafia madman, and it is a book that has about 300 pages. It is gripping, tells you the whole story, breaks it down year by year, and it's pretty incredible. And if God can do that in the life of Robert Borelli, he can do it in your life. And Amen. So I hope that you'll use this. If you find yourself saying, I know some people that would really like to hear this, go to our website right now, pointofview.net. You'll see a red button. There's one where it says listen, and you can just download that, just the podcast. But also, since he's in studio, there's a button that says watch, so you could watch it again. A couple hours from now, it'll be up there on YouTube, so you could pass it on to others. And that might be something that you would like to do. Have him come and speak at your men's retreat. Have him come and speak at a civic group, or have him speak at your church. I think you really enjoy having him, and so it's been great to have him in studio. Let's take a break, but when we come back, one of the things we like to talk about is this area of apologetics. How do we defend the Christian faith? And Dr. Paul Copan has been with us many times before. He's one of the editors of a very good worldview bulletin, which I subscribe to. And he's got one on apologetics methodology, which I think you're going to find really interesting, because we're going to talk about the pathways to Christ and how we can really minister to individuals and use some creative things in our world to witness to Jesus Christ. And so I think you're going to enjoy that. And we'll spend about half an hour with him, and then we'll get back into issues in the news. You will notice we have posted lots of articles for you to read, and those are on the website. But let's take a break. We'll be back right after these important messages.
Having civil conversations about important issues seems to be harder and harder. Various media outlets tell people what they should believe, why they should be outraged, and getting people to actually think, well, it can be difficult. Whether it's the gospel, tax issues, social policy, or just about anything else, you need to have solid information and clear thinking to address the hard issues. You need God's truth applied. And that's what you get in less than 2 minutes with Point of View's Viewpoints Commentary, a daily resource to help you be informed and think through the things we need to be talking about. It is free and will arrive in your inbox each day when you visit pointofview.net/signup. Sometimes we know we should say something, but we're silent because we're not quite sure what to say. Viewpoints Commentary can help you break the silence and change the narrative. It can make you a more equipped agent for truth. Get your free subscription to the Viewpoints Commentary at pointofview.net/signup. Pointofview.net/signup. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of view, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
This hour, we're going to spend some time talking about the area of apologetics, and we'll get back to some of the issues in the news. And if you've listened to Point of View, you know that we want you to know how to articulate a biblical worldview and, of course, know how to defend a biblical worldview. And that's where this idea of apologetics comes from, to really be able to make a defense for the hope that is in you. But over the last couple of years, we've also tried to help you understand that sometimes apologetics is both art and science. The science, and it's kind of logical, linear, and that is certainly something that we have talked about for years on Point of View. But we've also tried to expose you to some very gifted individuals that have talked about, if you will, the art side, if you will, sort of the right hemisphere creative side, the use of imagination, a number of other things. And so that's a part of where we're going to get into that today. We bring back to the microphone Dr. Paul Copan, who has his PhD from Marquette University. He holds the chair of philosophy and ethics at Palm Beach Atlantic University. Let me also mention that they are establishing and have established, I guess now, an MA program in philosophy of religion. We'll talk about that a little bit later. He has served as the president of the Evangelical Philosophical Society. We sometimes talk to him about some of his books that give a very good answer to the so-called new atheists, like, is God a moral monster? Is God a vindictive bully? He's also been a visiting scholar at Oxford University. But I might also mention that one of the things we've been promoting from time to time is the Worldview Bulletin, and we have one of the articles from that today. It's something I've subscribed to since I first heard about it, and encourage you to do so as well. But even if you don't you will be able to go on our website right now, and you'll see one on apologetics methodology part 2. We kind of covered part 1 the other day, and this is coming back to this particular issue. And so that's available on the website. Also, if you would like to know more about him, we have a link to paulcopan.com, and that has all sorts of information about the various events where he's speaking, many of his different books, and other resources. So, Dr. Paul Copan, always great to have you on the program.
Thank you very much, Kerby. Always a pleasure to be on with you.
Might just mention, as people get this, first thing they're going to notice is that this particular article talks about personalized pathways to Christ. And I think it's kind of interesting because I think anybody knows us. We're not saying that there are many ways to God, but we recognize that there are many ways people come to God. This last hour, we talked with an individual that grew up in the mafia and became a Christian. Well, that pathway to salvation is very different than maybe yours or mine. And so I don't want people to confuse it. But in one of the quotes here, as many ways as there are people, even so, there are many different ways that people have come to God. Now, I'm not saying they're different ways of salvation, but there is a sense in which some people are attracted by the mathematical certainty of the universe. Some people are attracted by the arguments for the existence of God. Some people are attracted to the fact that we have Old Testament prophecy actually fulfilled in the person of Jesus Christ. But others, interesting enough, find God through art, through literature, from the imagination. And that's kind of the theme that you and some of your co-authors have been talking about, isn't it?
Absolutely. We love the richness of Christian apologetics and how, being made in the image of God, there are many different facets of how we operate, what humanizes us, how we tick, And it's not just the intellect, but there are many different ways in which God can speak to us through the arts, through the imagination, through literature, through a host of things, as you are quoting.
And again, seems to me that one of the opening comments you have is from N.T. Wright. We've been privileged to have him on here every once in a while. He says, belief in God satisfies 4 basic needs: the longing for justice, the quest for spirituality, the hunger for relationships, and delight in beauty. Well, if you were to ask a lot of people doing apologetics during the 1970s and 80s, they wouldn't even have thought about that last one, and yet that's an issue as well. And I'm starting to see not only you, but Paul Gould and others writing about and talking about the fact that maybe there is a whole other area of apologetics that involves art, creativity, and imagination.
Absolutely. I think this is an untapped resource. And like you said, when I was starting out in apologetics, these were not really areas that were being discussed a whole lot. But as we've been going along, realizing that there are many ways in which God can connect with us. And you think of, say, Eastern Orthodoxy and its strong emphasis on beauty and transcendence, and how many people, as they come in, I remember reading about one person who came into an Eastern Orthodox church building, and he was just so astonished by the beauty. It was just a conversion point for him, just something that struck him with such force that beauty was a pathway into his heart. And I think that talking more about beauty and how beauty connects with us, connects us with the transcendent, is something that even atheists will recognize, that beauty and aesthetics are point us beyond our own kind of Darwinian existence, actually that show us hints of transcendence that are difficult to explain on a naturalistic basis.
I've noticed some of our proponents of intelligent design are doing that as well, because they now have some videos, for example, that talk about the fact that Charles Darwin really struggled with the idea of a peacock. I mean, there is no reason why a peacock had to be so beautiful and had to have so many different feathers and look the way it did, and yet it was kind of troubling. And of course, you have all sorts of other aspects of beauty. And for our friends, and I put this in quotes, like Richard Dawkins, Daniel Dennett, or when he was alive, Christopher Hitchens or Sam Harris or whatever, beauty is just supposedly just sort of an artifact of evolution. But there's just something in our spirit. God has placed eternity in the hearts of each individual. I think I could paraphrase the book of Ecclesiastes in that regard. They sense that something isn't quite right. That whole mechanistic mass energy, chance, and time doesn't quite answer the questions. And that's why I think this whole idea of imagination and beauty is really a very important and maybe developing area in the area of apologetics.
Absolutely. And I think we can tap into some of those observations that people are making about beauty. I mean, even the naturalists, like, I wrote a chapter in a book, and it's called "The Naturalists Are Declaring the Glory of God," in which I quoted a lot of naturalists who actually help reinforce the case for God's existence. And one of them is the area of beauty. I quote Steven Weinberg, the Nobel Prize-winning physicist, who said that the universe, the beauty of the universe seems, much more superfluous than necessary.
Yes.
It just seems like there's such an excess of beauty. And, and even somebody like Richard Dawkins, who said that biology is a study of things that appear to be designed for a purpose, but are not. Well, science can't tell us whether something is designed or not. That's a philosophical or theological judgment. And so we can ask the question, well, if things appear to be beautiful, if things appear to be, objectively transcendent, maybe it's because they are. So just to talk about real, apparent design versus real design.
Yes.
If it's apparent design, why can't we say that the reason that it looks like design is because it actually is design? And again, that's
Well
not
said.
something that science can tell us.
Let's take a break, and we will continue our conversation with Dr. Paul Copan. We also have a link to Worldview Bulletin in case you would like to subscribe. That's something I've done. I'm not asking you to do something I didn't do, and I think it's just an outstanding resource. We'll come back with him right after these important messages.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
In a recent essay, Lathan Watts talks about the value of free expression. He begins with a discussion of religious liberty since he's a lawyer with First Liberty Institute. He quickly explains that freedom of expression involves more than just religious free speech. His organization has seen these situations. A baker can lose her business because of her religious convictions about marriage. A football coach can be fired for kneeling in silent prayer at the end of a football game. A flight attendant can be fired for providing requested employee feedback. He concludes that each time a person of faith is forced into silence, or the untenable choice between piety and prosperity for a thought crime, or merely seeking to live peacefully according to their beliefs, which of late are at odds with cultural orthodoxy, defenders of religious liberty caution against a slippery slope towards tyranny. Why are we seeing such censorship? He believes that sometimes it is due to blissful ignorance or naivete. Other times it is arrogance from people who are supremely confident that their views are right and will never be in the minority. But they need to remember that they could suffer the same fate as those they persecute. So how should we respond when we are confronted by ideas with which we disagree? He argues that the proper response is introspection. The writer of Proverbs reminds us, as iron sharpens iron, so one man sharpens another. A civil discourse can help us understand others and may provide insight we do not have. It can help us refine and improve our positions. This is the price we pay for liberty. We are better people for being willing to engage the world of ideas, and if we want freedom of expression, then we should be willing to grant that same freedom to others. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free copy of Kerby's booklet, A Biblical View on Inflation, go to viewpoints.info/inflation. That's viewpoints.info/inflation.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes with Dr. Paul Copan, and we are talking today about apologetics methodology part 2. Now, I know all of my listeners that are obsessive-compulsive say, wait a minute, I want to read part 1. Well, if you go to the one link that we have on our website right now, first paragraph, it has a link to part 1, and that was written by David Baggett and Paul Gould, so you can read part 1 and 2. But if you really enjoy this, I hope some of you will consider subscribing to the Worldview Bulletin. Think very highly of the individuals that are part of that and certainly have learned a great deal. And so from time to time, we dip into some of the articles they've posted. And this one really gets into another aspect of apologetics. Paul, for a few minutes, we might just acknowledge that early on, you do talk about the fact that people have referred to apologetics as doubt removal, the removal of doubts that present obstacles. And I have found that when I go onto a college campus, there are quite a number of young people that sometimes say, well, I just don't believe the Bible because of all the contradictions, or I'm worried about what about the people in Africa that have never heard the gospel, and they always have such deep concerns about that, and those are just excuses. But at the same time, I recognize for all those people that have excuses, there are some very valid reasons that I've run into individuals that simply have, if you will, an intellectual obstacle, and the heart cannot accept what the mind rejects. So obviously, apologetics is providing evidence and dealing with that. But it is amazing as I read through your material, so much of this is not so much intellectual, it's more of a heart commitment. You quote from David Nagel, who's been, of course, at Dallas Baptist University. You quote from Paul Vitz, Faith of the Fatherless. You look at some of the outstanding atheists, that was a heart commitment because they grew up these outstanding atheists, whether it's Marx, Freud, Darwin, Sartre, Hitchens, whatever, they had either a defective father or father substitute. So I recognize that as we're talking about this, sometimes there are intellectual issues, but so many times there really are heart issues, aren't they?
Absolutely. When you look at a missing father figure or a negative father figure in one's life, when someone whose experience is colored by that, then hears about a heavenly father, that may send all sorts of negative vibes to that person. And of course, it gets things inverted. Rather than looking at our earthly role models, those who should be kind to us and helpful to us and so forth, when they're not, rather than dismissing the possibility of a heavenly father, we ought to say, well, actually, a heavenly father is actually the template for earthly fatherhood, rather than the other way around. And so, but often through, I found through relationships, through engaging with people, finding out about their story, which takes time to listen, just having them to spell out their own experience, and a lot of times the relational dimension comes out that they have a problem. The problem of evil is so powerful for them because it's been their view has been so colored by this negative father figure. Again, it doesn't disprove atheism. That would be the genetic fallacy. But it does illustrate the fact that people may resist God because there are subterranean relational issues. And it's and Paul Vitz in his Faith of the Fatherless goes through all of these noted atheists, kind of the hall of the faithless, the hall of atheism, but he also looks at the parallel accounts at the same time period that he covers of noted theists, people who believed in God, Blaise Pascal, Soren Kierkegaard, and others who had, or at least came to have, good relationships with their fathers, and this was something that they had a very healthy psyche because of that, and they found belief in God to be much more conducive to the way that they were thinking, rather than it being totally antithetical to their psyche. So these are very interesting studies, and it was written by someone who taught psychology at New York University, and just wrote a brilliant book.
And again, we've done a week of radio programs on it that people can look up at probe.org. But let me now get into art, literature, and the imagination, because that's another section that you have. And of course, we're going to spend a fair amount of time talking about C.S. Lewis. But to back into that, let's go first of all to the Old Testament. Nathan wants to confront David. He could have just said, "You're a sinner." But he didn't do that. Instead, notice how Nathan tells this really kind of arresting parable that really arouses David's imagination, his indignation, and then he pronounces condemnation until he finds out it's him. And many times when you're dealing with somebody that has a great deal of resistance, intellectual resistance, maybe defensiveness, that's where this idea of the imagination in art and literature can be very effective, can't it?
Absolutely. And so often we try to, in a sense, keep pounding the will of a human being through reason. We think, we've got to change his way of reasoning. And so often the defenses are up when we try to offer direct challenges to a person's worldview. What people like C.S. Lewis and others have discovered, of course, Nathan, we see that, the beautiful example of that is kind of getting around that direct confrontation, putting a person on his defense, into defensive mode, and actually telling a story. A story is very disarming. A story distracts you, as it were, from what you think the issue is, and it gets you kind of off on this rabbit trail, and all of a sudden it comes back on the path, and you realize, wow, I've just been walked into some very good reasons, in this case, for belief in God, why God makes sense, why I was looking at things in one way, but this totally changed my mind about how I'm thinking about things, and it actually allows us to see things with alternative perspective, that we realize, this imaginative perspective actually makes sense. Let me use now my reason to decide which imaginative alternative, which imaginary makes the best sense, and so the reason can be engaged, but it's through the imagination. So you think of these concentric circles with imagination as the outer band, and then reason in the middle, and then will at the very center of that. It's like a bullseye. You see that the imagination can actually be a pathway for the reason to engage alternatives. And then finally, the will can engage by choosing the more reasonable alternative. But again, it's because that imagination has been engaged, it's been fired up. There's been another way of looking at things. And so the imagination is a very important part of doing apologetics, because it helps, it enables other people to see, what if this is true? What if the Christian faith actually turns out to be true? What if these things are actually not just the appearance of design, but actually are real design? And so stories and imaginative scenarios can actually help in engaging that imagination.
I might just mention, too, one of the great quotes you have is from C.S. Lewis, talks about the place of imagination and why he wrote the Narnia stories, because he saw that these could steal past a certain inhibition that actually even paralyzed him. And so, again, I commend to all of you that if you would like to know a little bit more, this is another possible tool that you can put into your evangelism and apologetics toolbox. This is Apologetics Methodology Part 2, and you can follow the link to Part 1. So, again, that's a resource. But let's, if we can, just before I let you go, Paul, talk about the Worldview Bulletin. You and Paul Gould and others have put this together, I think, very highly of it, which is one of the reasons why we bring you on from time to time to talk about one of the articles.
Well, we appreciate it. Yeah, we've got stellar people who are contributing to the Worldview Bulletin, people who are trained in philosophy and apologetics. We've gotten wonderful reviews from people like John Lennox and J.P. Moreland and Lee Strobel and others who commend this to their audiences. And so we're just glad to be a part of this, to make something available that deals with apologetics, but also very strong cultural engagement. We also bring in lots of experts in their own fields, whether it be science or literature or whatever, and that they are also contributing to this bulletin as well. So we're actually drawing on a lot of, as it were, cultural, imaginative, intellectual firepower to contribute to the Worldview Bulletin newsletter. And it just is a very strong and robust offering that's very unique when it comes to apologetics. There's not a whole lot being done in this very way using this particular vehicle. So we're very excited about it, very enthusiastic about it, and would certainly encourage people to sign up for it.
Well, again, we have a link so that you can follow that on the Worldview Bulletin. Let me also encourage you, if you're a young person thinking about going off to college, Palm Beach Atlantic University, a place you might want to go. Now they have a master's degree as well. The other day I was talking to a parent that was thinking about sending their child to Palm Beach, and I told them all about Dr. Paul Copan and what was there, and I think they ended up enrolling. So, again, it's a great resource.
Fantastic.
And, Paul, thank you for being with us, and look forward to the next opportunity.
Thank you. Appreciate that. And also I'd add, we're just starting up a new apologetics undergrad program as well this coming fall, so keep that in mind as well. But Kerby, thanks so much. A pleasure to be with you.
And again, all of that at Palm Beach Atlantic University. Of course, we have that link there as well. We've got a link to Paul Copan. Okay, we're going to give you about a half an hour looking at some issues in the news, and all that comes up right after these important messages.
How has Point of View shaped your point of view? For the last half-century, Point of View has brought light to the culture thanks to the partnership of listeners and supporters like you. That's right, it's been 50 years. To celebrate our 50-year anniversary, Point of View wants to hear from you. Has Point of View ever inspired you to take action? Do you feel your faith and Christian worldview have been strengthened by the program? If so, share your story with us. Email it to story@pointofview.net or call 800-347-5151. Point of View would be nothing without you. You are Point of View's legacy. Don't let that legacy be forgotten. Share your story today. Tell the next generation how Point of View impacted your life. Your testimony could even be featured on the program. Again, share it to story@pointofview.net or call 800-347-5151. Story@pointofview.net. and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Final half hour. If you'd like to join the conversation, 1-800-351-1212. If you want to just sit back and listen, where you have just a few things to cover today, I'm going to look back just briefly at the speech by President Zelensky, because I think it was very significant. And just as a program note, let's just mention tomorrow, Friday, will be our weekend edition. And we'll have Kelly Shackelford with us. We'll have Keisha Russell. And we are going to be covering quite a number of issues. Already sort of put out an initial list of ones that we will talk about. about. One of those is an article written by Keisha related to the Supreme Court nominee, a couple other things on the Supreme Court nominee. Oh, and by the way, a lot of the mainstream press that said, all of that stuff about Hunter Biden's laptop, that's just disinformation, misinformation. Now, almost 2 years after the election, the New York Times discovers that Hunter Biden's laptop is real and that the corruption investigation involves a little bit more than taxes. So we will, of course, cover that tomorrow as well, which, by the way, is going to get into a little bit on social media censorship, which is one of our articles we've posted today by our friend John Lott. But just before we get to that, let's, if we can, talk about the fact that the Ukrainian President Zelensky addressed a joint session of the United States House and Senate in a special gathering that was put together. And it was interesting because I thought maybe I'll just give you a few comments from our good friend Dr. Jim Dennison, a few comments from Gary Bauer, and then we'll see where we can go from there. But I thought Jim Dennison, first of all, said that among the statements by President Zelensky, which he thought were most significant, were, quote, Russia has attacked not just us, not just our land, not just our cities. It went on a brutal offensive against our values, basic human values. It threw tanks and planes against our freedom, against our right to live freely in our own country, choosing our own future, against our own desire for happiness, against our own national dreams, just like the same dreams you have, you Americans. Now, it was interesting that after giving his speech in Ukrainian through a translator, then Mr. Zelensky closed by speaking in English, and he told the Congress this: peace in your country doesn't depend anymore only on you and your people. It depends on those next to you and those who are strong. Strong doesn't mean big. Strong is brave and ready to fight for the life of his citizens and citizens of the world, for human rights, for freedom, for the right to live decently, to die when your time comes, not when it's wanted by someone else, by your neighbor. And so just some incredible material that came out. And again, you can read more about that in a variety of different venues, but thought I would acknowledge that from the perspective of Jim Dennison. Gary Bauer said that it was a historic day in Washington. The Ukrainian President Zelensky has made a stirring presentation to a joint session of Congress. His remarks were as rousing as his personal courage, and his virtual address received the ovations and bipartisan praise that it deserved. So says Gary Bauer. He goes on to say that history has its accidents. It happened when Zelensky's name, Volodymyr and Vladimir, have the same meaning, that is, ruler of the world. And I was unaware of that their first names both mean that, or of great power. In the southeastern corner of Eastern Europe, a struggle of that magnitude seems underway. Zelensky's message, he says, was simple. The sovereignty of Ukraine is in danger, and its borders have been breached by 150,000 foreign troops. His plea was simple, too, that sovereignty and those borders must be protected against invasion and subversion of the rule of law. In response to his message, which they have spent decades ignoring at home, Speaker Nancy Pelosi and Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer and their liberal majorities led the deafening applause. He says, I was moved, too, but I have to say I felt a bit of jealousy. When was the last time one of our own leaders spoke with such clarity of purpose and appealed to the principles of liberty and the integrity of laws made by our own representative bodies? How stirring it would be if our president called the joint session of Congress to say that our nation's borders are being breached and our sovereignty compromised, and he intends to deal with it for the sake of our rule of law and our national well-being. Can you imagine the Speaker and Senator Schumer leading a boisterous applause for that? While we deliberate the best course of action to help Ukraine without stoking a nuclear confrontation, none of our leaders is doing or saying anything serious about securing our own borders and defending our own people, especially our youth. In February of this year alone, as many foreign nationals illegally crossed our national border as Russian soldiers invaded Ukraine, these poor Central Americans, Haitians, and others are not an armed military contingent, true enough, but the violence at the core of our open border is massive and unmistakable. Some of the border crossers have criminal records, and virtually all of them are being trucked into the United States by heavily armed cartels and gangs that are actually in control of our border. The blazing trucks whose glare lit the night sky results raging firefights between the cartels and Mexican police. Our Border Patrol has no hope of containing them. And then he goes on to talk about some other issues, whether we talk about China or a variety of other issues. And those are some very sobering words. But again, you can't help but have some people wish that we had some leaders that were as eloquent and as courageous as that individual. That doesn't necessarily justify that we send military troops in there, but maybe we send military arms and the rest. But I did think that before this week escapes, and maybe we'll get some comments tomorrow from Kelly Shackelford and Keisha Russell about that speech. I thought we might talk about it briefly. Let's go to a couple of the articles I've posted today. One of those relates to some of the material that we've made available on social media censorship. John Lott is an individual that's been on the program with us before. Individual that I find very reasonable, not extreme, not engaged in hyperbole. He's not well liked by the left because he does the research and says, all these attempts that you are trying to implement to deal with gun control are not going to work. But even so, he's taken his statistical analysis that he's looked at not only to guns, but voting and a variety of other things, and really brought, I think, a great deal of clarity. But he starts his piece, which we've posted on the website for you to read in its entirety, by saying, twice in 30 days, YouTube has censored videos of mine on topics that I previously covered for Real Clear Investigations and Real Clear Politics. The video platform blocked me from posting anything for 2 weeks and said the ban would be permanent if another violation occurred in the next 90 days. He says, for example, in January, a violation was issued after I posted a video on the problems with mail-in balloting in Missoula County, Montana. Matter of fact, I've been at the University of Montana in Missoula. I know where that is. Backpacked all over Missoula, fly fish there, and the rest. I know the area. It's a recount that found mail-out ballot envelopes are missing in a lot of the mail-in ballots that were counted. And so without an official printed envelope, registration information, voter signature, and the rest, then they should not have actually accepted that vote. It's against the law to count such votes. Now, when he appeared on one of these news shows and talked about that, that was immediately labeled as election misinformation. No, it's not. It's factual information. In fact, the video never discussed the presidential election, never said that Donald Trump won the election. Matter of fact, Donald Trump, first of all, won Montana handily, so the results were never in question. But again, as he then appealed to YouTube, they simply wrote back, they reviewed the video, they wouldn't change their decision, and would not respond to his arguments. It's reminiscent of the fact that when I wrote my booklet about a year or two ago on voter suppression and voter fraud, the only examples I used were from the Democratic primaries, because then you couldn't say that this was an example of Republican voter suppression because it was a problem that one Democrat had with another Democrat in the primaries. And of course, there were enough examples there that that was the case. And then if you think that one is extreme, then he was apparently on Sebastian Gorka's national radio program, and they were talking about this gun registry issue. But it turns out that actually they banned his YouTube video not for something he said, but something that Sebastian Gorka said, who supposedly violated community standards. So now he says, apparently I'm also responsible for monitoring not just what I say, but what others say in my presence. And if you haven't figured out by now, this article begins to take you through some other stories in which really we're to the point where I'm afraid sometimes YouTube has just completely lost perspective on that. And I wanted you to see that because every once in a while somebody says, well, are you in YouTube jail? Or are you in timeout or something like that? Some of the examples that are being used, not only by John Lott, but John Lomberg and by certainly John Stossel and others, are in case you would even say, okay, maybe that would be questionable. It isn't on that particular issue. And the example from Missoula and the example on the gun registry in February, in neither case would I think a fair-minded person say that he belonged in YouTube jail, but that's where he found himself in. And if this continues, you won't see John Lott on YouTube anymore. We'll be back right after this.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes. Let me just mention, as we are moving on, that the title of the article by John Lott is Social Media Censorship Particularly Hits Those Without Political Connections, because I didn't get into it, but I thought, just to be fair, at the end he talks about the fact that a couple of times when he was challenged by Twitter or even by Google, or of course Google is the parent company for YouTube, he had individuals like Grover Norquist step in and actually remove the strikes against his account and reactivate that. So the other part of that, which I think is even more disturbing, is when somebody does get dinged for what reason or another, there is the ability for some individuals to use their political influence to change that. And I'm well aware of some individuals doing financial programs where they have sometimes been able to then get a member of Congress to ask a question, and so things change a little bit. And that even is more disturbing, because I believe in a platform. I don't care if you're rich or poor. I don't know if you're politically correct or not politically incorrect. If you've got a good idea, I don't really care where it comes from. I think it is, for us, if nothing else, worthwhile to give that idea a platform. Now, again, you could say, well, they just don't get a platform on YouTube. Okay, it's a private company. Figured that out. But that's the one that a lot of people go to. And when you find yourself no longer allowed to communicate on Twitter, YouTube, Google, Facebook, well, there are alternatives, but they aren't quite as influential and not as well received and probably not ones that you go to either, which relates very much to my piece today. My commentary today actually is based on a very good piece by Lathan Watts, who's been on the program with us before, about free expression. And he gives some examples of individuals that have, for example, lost their business because of their religious convictions or fired or whatever. And he says, each time a person of faith is forced into silence or has to make the untenable choice between piety and prosperity for a, quote, thought crime, or merely seeking to live peacefully according to their beliefs, which are at odds with cultural orthodoxy, this is kind of a slippery slope. And he says, why are we seeing this censorship? Sometimes it's due to blissful ignorance, sometimes naivete, sometimes it's arrogance of people that are very confident of what they're saying is right. But we, I think, over the last couple of weeks have now seen things which, if you had said 2 years ago or even 6 months ago, would have gotten you censored from various social media platforms, which are now kind of what everybody accepts. And I mentioned that we'll get in tomorrow. The Hunter Biden laptop is a good example, or whether or not the virus can actually be spread if you've been vaccinated, and all sorts of issues like that. And so he says, look, when you're confronted with ideas with which you disagree, what's the proper response? He says introspection. Proverbs talks about the fact as iron sharpens iron, so one person sharpens another. And so if we want to have civil discourse, we need to listen. As a matter of fact, James 1:9 talks about the fact that we should be what? Quick to listen, slow to speak. So, okay, I want to listen. I want to hear your arguments. I want to hear your ideas. I want to hear your opinions. But just because you have an opinion doesn't mean I can't critique it. I mean, everybody is entitled to their own opinions. They're not entitled to their own facts. I'm going to be speaking tonight on a topic that relates very much to that idea. But again, we recognize we want to have civil discourse because we recognize, somebody might have an insight that you've never thought about before. Even if you disagree with it, maybe I can understand it, why they're coming from that. Why are they holding to that view? And so this is the price that we pay for liberty. And I think these social media platforms sometimes are making a big mistake by trying to limit these ideas. They should have a robust discussion and debate about those ideas. I've oftentimes said the best solution to bad ideas is more ideas, good ideas in the public forum. Anyway, there is one other article I didn't get to, and I did want to mention that, and that is, what's the impact of inflation? I'm holding up our booklet on inflation, which we've sent out to those of you that are donors, but if you don't have a copy of it, I would encourage you to just write to us. We'll send you a copy. And what you will find is I really kind of take you through some of the issues involving money and inflation and the rest. And one of our other articles I've entitled Inflation and Minority Voters, because what we see is a poll that came out through the Wall Street Journal that actually shows that millions of families around the country are really being hammered by inflation. And this article by Christopher Jacobs talks about, of course, out-of-control federal spending and even this idea of loose monetary policy, which are having an impact. If the printing machines at the Federal Reserve just are going, brrr, we're going to actually have dollars worth a lot less in the future than they're worth today. Well, the poll then actually is something that would be a wake-up call, I would think, for those in power. Who are those in power? Well, we have a Democrat in the Oval Office. We have a Democratic majority in the House. We have a slim Democratic majority in the Senate. And right now, what it shows is that when you start looking at all of the issues, except for, of course, the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Of course, people are going to be talking about that. Twice as many voters consider inflation and the economy the top priority for the president and Congress as they do even Ukraine. So even though Ukraine is every day in the news, we cover it every day. Almost everybody does. There are twice as many people, a majority of people, who are actually more concerned about inflation and the economy and believe that those should be the top priority for the president. And if they don't feel like they're getting answers from a Democratic president and Democratic leaders in the House and Senate, I think you can kind of figure out where that takes you. What was even more striking, and I won't go through the whole polls because polls can change and a lot can change between now and in November. But you have 60% of what would be considered non-white voters, ultimately minority voters. Asian American, but mostly African American, Hispanic American, listed inflation as their top priority, even by a higher margin than white voters, which was about 47%. And so you start looking at some of those issues, you can see that as well. Almost half of the respondents with incomes of less than $60,000 a year reported a major financial strain. Of course they did. While just 13% of those making $150,000 or more mentioned that. And of course, we know the answer for that, and that is if you're wealthy, the amount that you spend on food and energy and shelter is a smaller percentage, but those three items make up a disproportionate amount of those people that are middle income or lower income. So again, I wanted you to see that inflation may be the big issue in this election. And since most of you in the listening audience still have not had your midterm elections, those of us in Texas have, this I think is going to be another issue. And I posted this article because it goes into more detail, not only in terms of the poll, but what this could really mean and what could be done to address this issue of inflation. We'll no doubt probably talk about some of that tomorrow, but let me just real quickly mention that, again, we have the information about Robert Borelli. He was with us for the first hour. Quite a story. From mafia to ministry. Then we have the material from Paul Copan about how to do apologetics, maybe looking at creativity and imagination. You have my commentary today on free expression. We have some take action items. And also, if you've been listening to the program, we're encouraging some of you to maybe share with us your testimony about the impact that Point of View has had. And you'll hear that in just a minute. And we've made it very easy for you to leave those stories with us. And we found that oftentimes some people that have been listening to the program are encouraged to support the program because they hear your story. So I'd encourage you as we come off today maybe to think about calling that number and sharing your story. Doug, I want to thank you for being an engineer all week. You have really stood in the gap, and I appreciate that. Ivy, thank you as well for what you've done as the producer. And we encourage you to go to the website, pointofview.net. You'll find all sorts of great material there, and we look forward to seeing you tomorrow right here on Point of View.
Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas recently said, "The Declaration of Independence has weathered every storm for 245 years. It birthed a great nation. It abolished the sin of slavery, and it endeavored to address its effects. While we have failed the Declaration time and again, and the ideals of the Declaration time and again, I know of no time," said Thomas, "when the ideals have failed us." While some see our founding as fatally flawed and promote ideas that have failed every time they've been tried, at Point of View, like Justice Thomas, we still believe in America's ideals. And if you do too, make a difference today. Join the Truth Team as we promote the unchanging truth that gave us liberty and prosperity. Visit pointofview.net/team or call 1-800-347-5151. The original Americans responded to the call. Will you? Pointofview.net/team and 1-800-347-5151. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.